Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this webinar to discuss an extremely important issue, K-12 education funding in the state of Washington. My name is Amy Anderson. I'm the Government Affairs Director for AWB for Education and Workforce Training for the Association of Washington Business. The format for today's webinar is as follows. Our guests will provide background, information, and thoughts on the topic. At any time, you may send your questions in, and we will address those questions during the conversation. Joining us today is Representative Pat Sullivan from the 47th Legislative District. Representative Sullivan is the House Majority Leader and the prime sponsor of House Bill 1843, a proposal to fund K-12 education. Thank you, Representative, for being with us today. To start off, could you please just give us an overview of your proposal?
Sure, and one of the biggest issues we had to address was school employee compensation, and we formed the Education Funding Task Force last year to take a look at how teachers and administrators and classified staff were being paid. We hired a contractor to analyze the pay, and what we found was that for teachers, when you combine state and local funding, they were being paid a market rate wage. And so that was helpful in our analysis in forming what we did with our legislation. What we did for compensation was we threw out the current grid, which was based upon years of experience and educational attainment, and we created a new allocation system that funds districts based upon a statewide average for each of the categories, classified, administrative, and certificated staff. Then each district will form their own salary grid based upon the funding that comes into the district. With one caveat is the fact that beginning teachers will all have to be paid a minimum of $45,000 per year. And then after 3 years, we recognize that for most new teachers, they're going to have exceptional growth, and so each of those teachers need to be paid at least 10% additional pay after 3 years of experience. We also have a regionalization factor, recognizing that we want teachers and school employees to be able to live within the communities that they work. And so through the budget process, we will have an enhancement for those districts that have a higher cost of living to provide them the opportunity to live within their communities. We also took a look at professional development. A lot of parents and business people complain about the fact that right now school districts have to do professional development during the 180-day school year. So students are sent home for some days it's half days they're in school, and they let go early so teachers can engage in professional development. Over the next 2 biennium, we phase in 10 professional learning days so that it benefits teachers and allows them those 10 days for opportunities for professional development. But it also benefits students because they'll be in class for a full 180 days. We maintain the prototypical funding model that was adopted back in 2010, but we enhance a number of the key components for those students who are struggling in our schools. We increase funding for career and technical education, for the Learning Assistance Program, for the Transitional Bilingual Program, and for the Highly Capable Program. So they'll have additional instructional hours and additional opportunities. We also know that because we're increasing the base funding per FTE, that means more funding will go in for special education. We heard very loudly from special education advocates during the hearing process that they're worried about the cap that we put on the number of students that basically can be served. And so we amended the bill in committee to create a workforce to really take a look at that cap. It hasn't been looked at in years, and so I think it's important that we get that right. So we'll spend a little bit more time on special education. When it comes to levies, we eliminate the ghost money. That's money that's based upon funding that was cut out of the base through the Great Recession, and districts are able to collect money through levies based upon the higher amount. We eliminate that right away. Then we ratchet down all school levies down to 24% over 3 years. And we maintain local effort assistance. So property poor districts will get additional funding for enhancement services. That's before school programs, after school programs, sports and clubs, field trips, those types of things. And we think it's important that voters within local communities have a choice. They can either go to a 0% levy, for instance, and actually capture the property tax savings, or they can invest in schools and enhancement services up to 24% for those programs that their kids might want to participate in. We thought it was very important to have an accountability system so that as we're sending funding out to schools and levies are being raised, that we know where those levy dollars are going. One of the problems right now that we have is that we've got a law in the books that says that supplemental contracts can't fund basic education purposes, but we don't track those funds very well. And so we create a new system that allows us to track exactly where those local levy dollars are going. At the same time, we want to make sure that the new investments we're making are actually leading to increased student outcomes. And so we create a website at OSPI that will show key indicators, third grade reading scores, eighth grade math and science scores, so that we can show and demonstrate that districts are actually leading to greater student outcomes and our students are learning at a greater rate.
So you mentioned the reducing the levy. Does your plan then have additional funding? Do we increase the per pupil student funding in your plan?
Yeah, through the prototypical model, well, we put more money into the compensation program for teachers, so that's a significant increase. Then in those key areas, those categorical programs which enhance services for students who are struggling, we put significant new dollars in those programs as well.
And staying with that, you did mention there's an increase funding for career and technical education. Those definitely are skills that our businesses are looking for, really preparing kids for their post-secondary pursuits, whether it's going straight into the workplace or a post-secondary education. Can you talk a little bit more about how your proposal does increase the amount of funding for career and technical education? What differences are we going to see in our system?
Sure, and there's a number of ways that you can drive dollars out to local school districts. You know, we've got a local control state in where local school districts adopt budgets based upon the money that's allocated from the state. And some have recognized or wanted to drive out additional dollars through, it's called MSOC, maintenance, supply, and operating costs. We chose to reduce class size at both the Skills Center and for CTE programs within the school building. And it amounts to about $200 million over the next 4 years in additional funding for career and technical education programs. And districts will be able to provide additional opportunities across the board for those programs where students maybe want hands-on skills rather than the traditional learning method. And we know a lot of students will benefit from that.
Sure. So talking about class sizes, I know in the Senate Republicans' proposal, Initiative 1351 to reduce class sizes is repealed. That's not you're keeping that in your proposal. Can you explain the importance of that to you, of keeping Initiative 1351 and the reduction in class sizes and what that will do to the overall budget?
Well, Initiative 1351 is written to our basic education statute. And so if you're going to eliminate funding for programs that are basic education, you have to demonstrate or show that you're doing that for reasons that aren't fiscal, that you're doing it for educational reasons. And you may be able to make the argument for some of the funding within the initiative that there are better uses for those funds when it comes to education. But as I mentioned, for career and technical education, we're reducing class size to comply with Initiative 1351. We think there is an educational rationale for that reduction in class size. And so I think we have to be somewhat cautious when we look at the initiative and how those programs are being funded and what we do in the future with the rest of the initiative.
So is there an opportunity then to maybe look at Initiative 1351 and if there is a rationale for maybe not implementing all of that?
Absolutely. And we suspended it for 4 years. We're funding a portion of it in our proposal this year. I imagine the rest will be suspended until, again, we can take a look at those other components and determine, which of those really benefit our students and can lead to greater student opportunities.
Sure. So you talked about with our teacher compensation, increasing that. We know that it is the quality of the teacher that does have a big impact on our education of our students. So raising the teacher salary as well as teacher professional development. Talk about any other pieces in your proposal and the importance of how do we attract good teachers to the state of Washington and retain them as well.
Sure, and actually we're not talking about increasing teacher pay. We do increase beginning teacher pay, but overall the state is obligated to pay for that market rate salary so districts can actually hire competent people and attract people into the profession. Right now they're using those local levy dollars to supplement what the state provides. And so the state will be making that up, and it costs a significant amount of additional dollars on the state's behalf. But overall, you're not going to see teacher pay raise. It's just where the money's coming from. But in order to attract teachers, the Senate proposal just eliminates certification. I mean, it allows anybody to come into the classroom as long as they can pass a background check. I know lots of very smart people, people who are work in their professions and do a tremendous job, but would not be very good teachers. So we have to have a certification process that ensures that those that are in the classroom can teach well. And so using alternative routes to certification, trying to enhance teachers through incentives like loan forgiveness. I think those are ways that we can attract people into the profession. But then it's paying them a fair wage throughout their educational process as they're teaching. Recognizing national board certification, for example, where we provide an additional $5,000 for those teachers who get nationally board certified, and an additional $5,000 for those teachers who are willing to teach in high poverty areas. And so those are, I think, some of the ways that we can attract teachers into the profession. I think also we have to treat them with respect. Teaching is a difficult profession. We know that we're trusting people to spend as much or more time with our children than we do. And I think it's incumbent upon us to recognize the fact that they do a critical job and reward them for that.
So you mentioned alternative paths to certification, and there is definitely value in bringing industry experience into the classroom so that there's a practical application of that curriculum that they're being taught.
Right.
As we go through then, as we see now currently in skills centers, would you be looking at a model where you have a certain amount of certificated teachers, there's a ratio of number to non-certificated teachers, but again, there's some type of a training to that non-certificated teacher? Is that what you were speaking to?
Yeah, absolutely. And last year, we passed a bill that Senator Danmeyer was a prime sponsor of. We spent a little bit of money in the budget to increase the number of people served by alternative routes, but I think there's more progress that needs to be made in that regard.
Sure. Absolutely. Charter schools, choice in schools. Does your proposal have any impact on those?
It doesn't. We passed the charter school bill last year, and we leave that as it is.
Okay. So are they receiving the same prototypical
Yes.
funding through the prototypical
Correct.
model on it there? Okay. So funding for your proposal.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have thoughts on that? And where would we find? Where are you going to find the funding for this, and how much are you looking at additional dollars going into the budget?
And this is actually a policy document. We're making policy decisions which obviously lead to increased cost, but we do the same thing when it comes to mental health. We do the same thing when it comes to homelessness policy. In the end, we're going to have to pass a budget which provides revenue or funding for education, but for the rest of our budget as well. In the past, we've had revenue proposals that the Senate has dismissed. Senate Republicans dismissed right out of hand, said that they were dead on arrival in the Senate. I think we have to be careful about the politics entering into this. We want to make sure that we have a proposal that actually doesn't get wrapped up in that politics. We're talking about educating our children, and it's too important to have a fight over a political fight over revenue. We've said all along we want to work with the Washington Roundtable and the Association Washington Business to develop a revenue package that doesn't hamstring business growth in the state of Washington, because we need business growth here. And so we want to work with the business community. We want to work with the Senate Republicans in developing that package that actually pays for our schools as well as the rest of the budget.
So going a little bit off topic, but sticking obviously with where we're at, how does the proposal, and how would you propose that business really integrate themselves into the education system so that the students that are coming out of our system are really prepared? They have those skills, the necessary skills, and that business is then informing that process.
I think it's actually having meetings on a regular basis, discussing where the shortfalls are, the shortcomings in our current system, where there can be improvements. When we see skill deficits for students who are coming out of our system, I think having that communication with the business community so that we can maybe make additional resources or policies in a specific area to ensure that those students are well prepared as they graduate from high school and move into either a 2-year, 4-year apprenticeship program or right into work. But I think it's having that open lines of communication that's the most critical piece of this.
So the rural areas, a lot of Washington is rural, and that's where a lot of our school districts struggle. They don't necessarily have the business input. They don't necessarily have the tax base to support them. How does your proposal, how would you propose to integrate them better into our education system as a whole and really meet the needs of their local areas?
Sure, and that's why it's important that the state actually funds a full program of basic education. And so local districts, rural districts don't have to rely on local levy money in order to fund basic education. So that's first and foremost, is that the state meets its constitutional obligation to fully and amply fund K-12 education. On top of that, I think we've seen levies pass across the state, even in rural communities, because they care about education. They want to enhance those services. And so providing local governments, local school districts opportunity to raise enhancement dollars is really important. But in our plan, we also maintain the levy equalization, so that for property poor districts, there's additional funding for the state to actually provide for the sports programs, the clubs, those before school and after school programs. It has to continue to be a partnership. The state steps up to its obligation, but also helps those property poor districts by providing additional resources for enhancement purposes.
One question we've had is around the Levy Cliff. You hear constantly that if we don't pass an adjustment to that this year, that we're going to have to start sending out notices to our teachers. Is this addressed in your proposal? And if so, how? I think you mentioned earlier reduction, but on the short term, how is that addressed?
So in the short term, again, we eliminate the ghost money completely in the first year. Then we ratchet down local levies over a 3-year period. So that addresses the levy situation. I think what we're talking about is the House in the first, actually the first bill that we passed was a bill that guaranteed local school districts that at the end of the year they would not lose funding. Because if we don't get an agreement on a bill, they will lose funding. January 1st of 2018, significant local levy dollars will go away, as well as levy equalization dollars for those property poor districts. And so I'm fairly confident, pretty confident that we're going to get an agreement, obviously before the end of the session. But in the meantime, school districts have to adopt budgets. And so if they can't be assured that they're going to get at least the same level of funding as they've gotten in the previous year, they're going to have to send out pink slips to those teachers. And we're going to have teachers telling their students that they're not sure if they're going to be back next year after they get those pink slips, and they're going to talk to their parents, and it creates a great deal of uncertainty. And for a young teacher who's maybe just come out of school, they've got heavy student debt, they get a pink slip. If they find another job, they're going to take another job. And we can't afford to lose those teachers right now at a time where we're struggling to actually recruit and retain qualified teachers. And so it's not a big, heavy lift to actually pass the bill. I think it's something that makes sense. Our school districts are panicking right now, and we're hearing from them. And I'm hopeful that the Senate will see that it's important to actually pass the bill. I think Seattle School District has already said that those notices will go out at the end of this month. I've heard from my local districts that some of them will begin shortly after that. It's a scary time for local school districts and for teachers.
So I'm going to take you back a little bit to the funding piece of this, and understanding this is a policy proposal. We do have the need to increase funding to education. So do you believe that there is enough funding increased funding in our revenue or increased revenue within the state that will cover our needs, or will we need to look for new revenue?
I don't think there's, as we've looked at it over the years, it will require new revenue. I mean, even the Senate budget proposal right now, it increases the state property tax by $2 billion. The numbers keep changing, so we're trying to get those tacked down. But despite that $2 billion in increased property taxes, their budget is short at least $1.4 billion. And again, as we're finding these new numbers, that might increase to $2 to $2.5 billion. And they have not demonstrated where those additional dollars will come from. But within our current revenue, you're either going to make reductions to current programs, or you're going to raise revenue to replace those dollars. And so I don't see how we can make it through this process without some additional revenue.
So to wrap up, I'd like to hear your final thoughts or anything that you wanted to add. But knowing and just wanting to the audience to understand there are several proposals out there. Policy-wise, very similar. You're addressing our needs with making sure that we're able to retain and recruit new teachers or good teachers, making sure our kids have the funding that they need, and making sure that the programs that are in place are well funded. So it's a moving target right now. So your final thoughts on that, where you think 1843 is going to go as we hit cutoff today, and what we need to do moving forward?
So our plan is that the bill is scheduled, likely will come up next week in the House for a vote on the floor. Then from there, we're going to reach out to our Senate Republican colleagues and begin negotiating a compromise. There are a number of concerns that were raised with their proposal. 2/3 of kids that now qualify for learning assistance program would be eliminated from that program. The 80% cap means that local school districts, and we heard from them during our hearing, right now that means that they would either have to reduce teacher pay or pay less teachers and increase class size. The proposal reduces funding for special education. I mean, there are a number of pieces in their current proposal that we don't think work. That being said, we're going to sit down and negotiate a compromise that does the best for our students and for our school districts.
Good. Well, thank you. We appreciate the time this morning. The hard work on this. This is a key issue for businesses, as that's our future workforce. So the attention paid to this and the detail to the needs of our students is extremely important. So we thank you very much for the work on this and for being here this morning.
You bet. We look forward to working with the business community as well.
Great. Thank you very much. And thank you all for joining us this morning.